The day I buried my father, I thought the worst pain was losing him. I was wrong. It was a gray, overcast day, the kind that seems to mourn with you. I stood by my father's grave, the scent of fresh earth mingling with the flowers, as the priest's words faded into the background. My father, the man who had been my rock, my mentor, was gone. I felt hollow, like a part of me had been buried with him. He'd been more than just a parent. He'd been my guide, the one who gave me the seed money to start my cybersecurity firm, the one who believed in me when I doubted myself. Now, at 36, I was supposed to carry on without him, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down on me harder than the damp air. Around me, family and friends gathered, their faces a blur of sympathy and sorrow. My wife, Rachel, stood beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. She was composed, as always, her dark hair pulled back neatly, her eyes red from crying. She'd been my partner for 10 years, and in that moment, I appreciated her presence, though I was too numb to tell her so. She'd always had a way of charming people, of making them feel at ease, and I'd leaned on that more times than I could count. Across from us, Julian Westbrook, my father's lawyer, watched the proceedings with a solemn expression. He was a tall man, with sharp features and an air of confidence that sometimes rubbed me the wrong way. I'd never particularly liked him. There was something about his polished demeanor that felt too calculated, but my father trusted him completely, so I'd kept my reservations to myself. Julian had handled all of my father's legal affairs, from the business to the estate, and I figured he'd be a key figure in the days ahead as we sorted everything out. As the priest wrapped up the eulogy, I stepped forward to place a rose on the coffin. My hand trembled slightly, and I had to take a deep breath to steady myself against the wave of grief. Rachel squeezed my arm gently, a quiet gesture that felt like an anchor in the storm of my emotions. I glanced at her, grateful, and then my eyes drifted to Julian. He was looking at Rachel, not me, and for a split second, I thought I saw something pass between them, a flicker of familiarity that didn't quite fit. But I brushed it off. My mind was a mess, grasping at shadows. After the burial, we moved to the family estate for the reception. The house, a sprawling manor that had been in my family for generations, felt emptier without my father's commanding presence. Guests mingled in the grand living room, their voices a low hum as they shared memories and offered condolences. I tried to play the host, nodding and thanking people for coming, but my thoughts kept drifting to the business, to the estate, to the gaping hole my father had left behind. Rachel floated through the crowd, her charm on full display as she comforted relatives and accepted hugs. I envied her ease, her ability to keep going when I felt like I was drowning. I was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames, when Mr. Thompson approached me. He was my father's oldest friend and business partner, a stout man with kind eyes and a gentle way about him. I'd known him since I was a kid. He'd been at every holiday, every milestone. "Ethan," he said softly, his voice cutting through the fog in my head, "could I have a word with you in private?" I nodded, glad for a reason to step away. We walked to my father's study, a room lined with bookshelves and heavy with memories. The leather chair behind the desk still smelled like him, and for a moment, I had to close my eyes against the ache. Mr. Thompson shut the door behind us and turned to me, his expression troubled. I'd never seen him look so uneasy, and it sent a chill through me. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you," he started, his voice low and hesitant. "It's not easy, and I wish I didn't have to burden you with this, especially today." My stomach tightened. "What is it, Mr. Thompson?" He took a deep breath, like he was bracing himself. "It's about Rachel and Julian." I frowned, not following. "What about them?" "I've seen them together, Ethan. More than once. At first, I thought it was just friendly meetings, maybe something to do with the estate, but it was more than that. They were close." The words hit me hard, knocking the air out of me. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I believe Rachel has been having an affair with Julian," he said, his eyes full of sympathy. "I saw them at a restaurant a few weeks ago, sitting too close, talking in a way that didn't look innocent. And then again, leaving a hotel together. I didn't want to believe it myself, but I couldn't keep it from you. Your father would have wanted me to look out for you." I stumbled back, my hand finding the edge of the desk for support. My mind spun, trying to make sense of what he was telling me. Rachel, my wife, cheating on me with Julian? It couldn't be true. We'd had our rough patches, times when I was too focused on work or my father's health, but an affair? With my father's lawyer? It didn't add up. And yet, as I stood there, pieces started clicking into place. The late nights she'd brushed off as catching up with friends, the way she'd been vague about her plans lately, the look I'd caught between her and Julian at the graveside. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I wish I wasn't, Mr. Thompson said. But I saw what I saw. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I shook my head, disbelief warring with a growing dread. I need to talk to her. He nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. Take your time. If there's anything I can do, just say it. Thank you, I managed, though the words felt empty. He left the room, and I stood there, alone with the weight of what he'd told me. Anger started to simmer beneath the grief, hot and sharp. I'd trusted Rachel, leaned on her, built a life with her. And Julian, my father had relied on him, brought him into our world. If this was true, it wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of everything my father had stood for. I found Rachel in the living room, chatting with some cousins. She was smiling, that effortless charm lighting up her face, but it faded when she saw me. Ethan, what's wrong? She asked, stepping toward me. We need to talk, I said, my voice tight. Now. She followed me back to the study, her brow furrowed with concern. Once the door was closed, I turned to her, my hands shaking. Is it true? Is what true? She asked, tilting her head like she genuinely didn't know. Have you been sleeping with Julian? The question came out harsh, raw, and it hung in the air between us. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she froze. Ethan, what are you talking about? Don't play dumb with me, Rachel. Not today. I took a step closer, my voice rising despite my effort to keep it steady. Mr. Thompson saw you. At a restaurant, at a hotel. He told me everything. Is it true? She paled, her composure cracking. Ethan, just tell me, I snapped, cutting her off. I deserve that much. Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked away, her voice dropping to a whisper. It was a mistake, Ethan. I was lonely. You were always so wrapped up in your father, in the business. I felt like I didn't matter. So you turned to Julian? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How long? A few months, she admitted, barely audible. But it didn't mean anything. I love you, Ethan. I never wanted to hurt you. You didn't want to hurt me? I echoed, the words bitter on my tongue. You betrayed me, Rachel. On the day I bury my father, I have to find this out? How could you? I'm so sorry, she said, her voice breaking as she reached for me. I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't. I can't even look at you right now. Please, Ethan, we can talk about this, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. We can fix it. But I was already heading for the door, the room feeling too small, too suffocating. I needed to get out, to breathe, to think. I stepped onto the porch, the cool evening air hitting my face, and I gripped the railing, trying to steady myself. My father was gone, and now my marriage, my whole life, was unraveling. I'd trusted her, believed in us, and she'd thrown it all away. As I stood there, staring into the darkening sky, I couldn't help but replay our years together. 10 years of marriage, of building something I thought was solid. Sure, I've been busy, maybe too focused on my father and the company at times, but I'd never imagined she'd do this. And with Julian, of all people, the man who'd sat across from us at family dinners, who'd handled my father's trust. It made me sick to think about it. But even as the pain threatened to swallow me, something else took root, a quiet, burning resolve. This wasn't going to break me. I'd lost my father, and now I'd lost the illusion of my marriage, but I wasn't going to let it end here. I needed to know the full truth, to understand how deep this went. Something told me there was more to this story, and I wasn't about to let it stay buried. I didn't know it then, but that day was just the beginning of a betrayal far bigger than I could have imagined. It had been 3 days since the funeral, and I couldn't find peace in the silence of the house any longer. Rachel drifted through the rooms with a cautious air, her usual brightness dimmed by something I couldn't quite name. She tried speaking to me a few times, offering apologies that felt hollow, but I wasn't ready to hear her out. Not after what Mr. Thompson had told me about her and Julian. I needed something real, evidence I could hold on to, something to tell me whether this was all true or just a cruel misunderstanding. Sitting in my home office, I stared at the blank computer screen, my hands restless above the keys. I'd built a career finding answers and data, and now I had to use those skills to uncover the truth about my own life. I decided to start with something simple, her phone records. We shared an account, so accessing them was easy enough. As I scrolled through the list of calls and texts, a pattern jumped out at me almost immediately. There were repeated contacts with a number I didn't know, calls made late at night or early in the morning when I wasn't around. My chest tightened as I checked the number against my contacts and then a reverse lookup. It belonged to Julian. I told myself it could be about the estate, some legal detail they were sorting out, but deep down I knew that wasn't it. Still, I couldn't stop there. I needed more than just a hunch. I needed to see what was happening with my own eyes, to know for certain what they were hiding. The next morning, Rachel mentioned she was stepping out for coffee with a friend. "I just need a break from everything," she said, her voice soft and almost fragile, like she was asking for permission. I nodded and told her to take her time, keeping my tone even despite the storm building inside me. As soon as her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my keys and followed her, staying far enough back to avoid notice. My pulse raced as I trailed her through the city, watching her turn into a parking lot near a cafe we'd visited together before. I parked across the street, my eyes locked on her as she stepped out and walked inside. For a moment, I wondered if I was wrong, if she really was just meeting someone else, until Julian's car rolled into view. He climbed out, glanced around briefly, and disappeared into the cafe after her. I sat there, frozen, my hands clenched around the steering wheel as the reality sank in. Part of me wanted to barge in and confront them right then, but I held back, forcing myself to think clearly. I had to know the full scope of this, had to understand what I was dealing with. After what seemed like hours, they stepped outside together. Rachel laughed at something he said, her hand brushing his arm in a way that made my stomach turn. They walked to her car, and just before she got in, Julian leaned down and kissed her, a quick, quiet moment that shattered any doubt I had left. Anger surged through me, hot and overwhelming, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't lose control yet. There was more to this. I could feel it, and I wasn't going to let them see me break. That night, while Rachel slept, I slipped into the study and logged into our shared cloud storage. She'd always backed up her emails and files there, and I knew if there was anything to find, it'd be waiting for me. I sifted through months of messages, my heart sinking with every exchange between her and Julian. What started as dry notes about my father's estate turned into something else, personal, affectionate, undeniable. One email stopped me cold, sent from Julian a week before my father passed away. The subject read, "The new will is in place." I opened it and read his words. "Everything is set. Your name is on it now." He signed it without question. "We're almost there." Rachel's response was short. "Thank you. I can't wait for this to be over." I stared at the screen, my mind racing to make sense of it. The will had been updated recently, but my father had never mentioned anything strange. Had Julian pushed him into this? And why? I couldn't let it go. The next morning, I told Rachel I had a meeting with clients and would be home late, keeping my voice steady as I avoided her gaze. She nodded, her face giving nothing away, and I left for my father's estate. The house was empty when I arrived, the staff gone for the day, and I made my way to his office. The safe sat behind a painting of my great-grandfather, and I punched in the combination, my mother's birthday. The door swung open, revealing a pile of documents. I pulled out the will and started reading, expecting the usual breakdown of assets between me, Rachel, and a few charities. But then I saw it. Rachel was named executor, with complete control over everything. That wasn't what my father had planned. He'd always said I'd handle the estate. Further down, a clause gave her authority over the family business, even the option to sell it. My father would never have agreed to that. It was his pride, his legacy, meant for me. I sank into his chair, the will trembling in my hands as the pieces clicked together. This wasn't just about an affair. Rachel and Julian had worked together, twisting my father's trust to shift everything in their favor. They weren't just betraying me, they were stealing what he'd built, what he'd left for me. The weight of it pressed down on me, anger and disbelief warring inside my chest. I couldn't let them win. Not like this. I slammed the front door behind me, the sound bouncing off the walls of the empty hallway. My heart was racing, a storm of anger and disbelief churning inside me as I stepped into our house. I'd just come from my father's estate, clutching the tampered will in my hand, proof of Rachel's betrayal that I couldn't shake from my mind. As I walked into the living room, I saw her sprawled on the couch, her eyes snapping up to meet mine, wide with surprise. "Ethan, you're back already?" she said, her voice careful, like she could feel the tension rolling off me. I didn't answer right away. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself for what was coming. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, my voice thick, heavy with everything I was holding back. I held up the wrinkled will, my fingers shaking a little from how tight I was gripping it. "I found this in my father's safe. The will he signed just weeks before he died. The one that makes you the executor of everything. Want to tell me what's going on?" Her face went pale, and she stood up, taking a small step toward me like she wasn't sure how close she could get. "Ethan, I can explain," she started, but I cut her off, my words sharp and biting. "Explain what?" How you and Julian got my father to sign this. How you turned your back on me and everything we had for your own gain. She flinched, but she didn't back down, her expression shifting from shock to something harder. It wasn't like that, Ethan. Your father was sick, and someone had to take charge. Julian thought I could help, that it would make things easier for the family. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head as I stared at her. Easier for the family? Or easier for you and Julian to take the estate and cut me out of my own inheritance? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were real or just part of some act I didn't believe anymore. Ethan, please, you have to believe me. I never meant to hurt you. I love you. Love. I snapped, stepping closer, my voice thick with disgust. Is that what you call sneaking around with Julian behind my back? Is that your idea of love? She froze, her mouth opening like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out at first. Then, in a quiet voice, she asked, "How did you find out?" My eyes narrowed, anger flaring up again. Does it matter? I saw you with him, Rachel. I saw you kissing him outside that cafe. Then I found the emails, the messages. You've been lying to me for months. She sank back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands like she couldn't hold herself up anymore. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant for it to happen. It just happened. I stared at her, my voice rising as I struggled to process that. It just happened? Affairs don't just happen, Rachel. You chose this. You chose to throw away our marriage, to stab me in the back. She looked up at me, her eyes red and desperate. I was lonely, Ethan. You were always tied up with your father, always lost in the business. I felt invisible. So you ran to Julian? I asked, my voice dripping with bitterness as I started pacing the room, too restless to stand still. The guy who was supposed to look out for my family, not tear it apart? She shook her head, tears streaming down her face as she tried to justify it. He was there when you weren't. He listened to me, made me feel like I mattered. I stopped pacing and turned to her, my face cold and hard. And in return, you helped him mess with my father's will. You used your sway to take control of everything he worked for. It wasn't like that, she said, her voice shaking as she stood up again, desperation creeping in. Julian said it was the right thing, that it would protect the estate. My anger flared, and I stepped closer, my words slicing through the air. Protect it from who? From me? His own son. She didn't answer, just sat back down, sobbing quietly, while I kept pacing, trying to wrestle with the chaos inside me. After a long, heavy silence, I stopped and looked at her, my face set like stone. I can't do this, Rachel. I can't stay with someone who'd betray me like this, who'd betray my family. Her head shot up, panic flashing in her eyes as she reached for me. Ethan, please, don't say that. We can fix this. I messed up, but I still love you. I shook my head, my mind made up. Love isn't enough anymore, Rachel. Not after this. You've broken my trust, and I don't think I can ever get it back. She stumbled to her feet, grabbing for my arm, but I stepped back, keeping her away. Please, Ethan, give me another chance. I'll do anything to fix this. My voice was steady, final. I need you to leave, Rachel. I need time to think, to figure out what's next. I can't have you here right now. Her face crumpled, and she nodded slowly, like she knew there was no changing my mind. I'll go stay with my sister for a while. But please, Ethan, don't give up on us completely. I didn't say anything, just watched as she gathered her things and headed for the door. When it clicked shut behind her, the house went still, and I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and emptiness. The fight was over, but the fallout was just starting to settle in. I sat alone in the quiet house after Rachel stormed out, her betrayal hitting me like a punch to the gut. But I wasn't going to just sit there and take it. My head was spinning with ideas, ways to turn this mess around, to hit back at her and Julian. I'm a cybersecurity expert, not some helpless fool, and I knew I had the skills to dig into their lies and protect my father's legacy. It wasn't about revenge, it was about doing what's right. So I fired up my computer, my fingers moving fast over the keys, ready to uncover every dirty detail they thought they'd hidden. I started with Rachel's email. I'd cracked into it before, but this time I went deep, checking deleted messages, poking into every corner. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. A trail of emails between her and Julian that made me sick. Months of scheming laid out plain as day. Talk about tricking my father into changing his will. Plans to make sure Rachel ended up with the estate. Even notes about stashing money overseas once they'd pulled it off. It was damning stuff, but I needed more than words. I needed proof they'd forced him. Then it hit me, the security camera I'd put in his office years back, when his health started slipping, to keep an eye on things. I logged into the cloud storage and scrolled through the old footage, my heart pounding as I found the day the new will was signed. There it was, Julian across from my father, pushing papers at him while Dad, weak and shaky, fumbled with the pen. Rachel was right there, her hand on his shoulder, leaning in to whisper something as she steered his hand to sign. It was so calm, so cold, but I could see it, her controlling him, making sure he did it. That video was gold. It could prove they'd pressured him, and I knew it'd hold up. But I wasn't done. To win this, I had to follow the money. Using my skills, I dug into my father's accounts, cross-checked them with Julian's firm, and found the trail. Big chunks of cash moved from the estate to Julian's business, then into accounts under Rachel's name, all before Dad died. It was theft, pure and simple, and seeing it fueled me. I wasn't just mad. I was focused. I put together a solid file of evidence, everything I'd need to take them down. I called my lawyer, David Thompson, a guy who'd taken over Dad's practice and cared about fairness as much as I did. I laid it all out over the phone, the emails, the video, the money trail, and sent him the files. He listened, steady as ever, then said, "Ethan, this is strong. We can challenge the will for undue influence and go after them for fraud and embezzlement. It'll get messy, though. You sure you're up for it?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I'm in." They don't get to walk away. David said he'd get started, and I finally felt like I was taking back some control. Next, I had to face them. I wanted to see their smug faces fall when they realized I'd beaten them at their own game. I called Julian, set up a meeting at his office about the estate, and showed up to find Rachel already there, looking nervous. Julian tried his fake charm, smiling too wide. "Ethan, good to see you. Let's sort this out like adults." I didn't say a word, just dropped a thick folder on his desk, the thud shutting him up. He opened it, frowning, while Rachel peeked over his shoulder and went pale. "What's this supposed to be?" Julian snapped, flipping through the emails and bank records. I kept my voice level, but firm. "It's proof you and Rachel conned my father into changing his will. It's your affair, the money you stole, and how you pushed him to sign. I've got video too, him signing while Rachel made sure he did it. My lawyers got it all, and we're coming for you." Julian's face turned red, his hands tightening on the folder. "You're bluffing. This won't stick." I pulled out my phone and played the video, letting them watch my father's shaky hand and Rachel's grip on him. She gasped, tears starting as she grabbed the desk. "Ethan, please," she begged. "We can work this out." I didn't mean it to go this far. I stared at her, feeling nothing but ice. "You meant it all, Rachel. You and Julian chose this. Now you deal with it." Julian jumped up, yelling, "You think you can ruin me? I'll fight you tooth and nail." "Go for it," I said, staring him down. "I've got what I need to win." Rachel reached for my arm, but I shook her off. "Save it. You're finished." She collapsed back, crying as I walked out, leaving them with the mess they'd made. Outside, I could breathe again. The anger was still there, but it had a purpose now. Court was coming, and I was ready, armed with the truth in a fight they never saw coming. The days following my confrontation with Rachel and Julian passed in a haze, leaving me restless and unsettled. I had taken the necessary steps, delivered the evidence to my lawyer, David Thompson, and initiated the legal process, but the gravity of my actions lingered, pressing down on me. Sleep eluded me. I spent hours pacing the empty house or staring blankly at my computer, anticipating news. The silence without Rachel was deafening, yet I couldn't bring myself to face her again, not after everything. My focus needed to remain sharp for the battle ahead, though my thoughts often drifted to my father's estate, the business, and the life I once knew, all teetering on the edge of collapse. A few days later, David's call broke the monotony, his tone measured yet firm. "Ethan, we've secured an emergency hearing next week due to the fraud claims. The judge approved it, but Julian's legal team is resisting fiercely. With the evidence you provided, our position is solid, though expect a tough fight." I gripped the phone tighter, my jaw clenching at the thought of facing Julian in court. "And Rachel?" I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. David paused briefly before responding. "She's listed as a co-conspirator. Her attorney is framing her as someone misled by Julian, but we'll see if that holds. Prepare yourself. It's going to be intense." I ended the call, a knot forming in my gut, realizing this wasn't just a legal dispute but a public unraveling of my entire world. Desperate for perspective, I reached out to my cousin Mark, the one person I could rely on to be honest. We'd been close since childhood, and his voice carried a familiar warmth when he answered. "Ethan, how are you managing through this chaos?" I exhaled heavily, slumping into a chair. I'm not sure, Mark. It's a mess, taking my wife and my father's lawyer to court over fraud. Half the time, I can't even think straight. He didn't respond immediately, then said, "You're doing what's right, Ethan. It's hard, but you're standing up for what belongs to you. Don't let them shake your resolve." His reassurance steadied me somewhat, though a sliver of uncertainty remained, coiling tighter as the court date approached. The night before the hearing, I found myself in my father's study, surrounded by his books and the faint scent of his presence. I traced my fingers along his desk, memories flooding back of our conversations, his lessons, his laughter. What would he make of this mess? Would he approve of my fight, or lament how far things had fallen? No answers came, only a deep ache I'd suppressed for too long. Sitting there, alone in the dim light, I felt the full force of his absence, the sting of betrayal, and the isolation of my choices, emotions I couldn't outrun anymore. When the court day arrived, I entered the courthouse feeling suffocated by my suit and the weight of anticipation. David met me at the entrance, his demeanor composed yet alert. "You ready for this?" he asked, giving my shoulder a firm pat. I nodded, uncertain if I truly was. Inside, I spotted Rachel across the room, her face pale and tense, her eyes briefly meeting mine with an expression I couldn't decipher, sorrow, perhaps, or dread. Julian sat beside her, rigid and unyielding, staring ahead as if none of this fazed him. I took my place, pulse racing, as the judge entered and the session commenced. David laid out our case with precision, presenting the emails, financial records, and a video of my father signing the will under Rachel's supervision. Julian's attorney countered, insisting my father acted willingly and that Rachel merely assisted with estate matters. But when David played the video, the courtroom hushed. My father's confusion was evident, his hand trembling as Rachel guided it across the page. Watching it felt unbearable, and I turned my gaze to the table, swallowing hard against the lump in my throat. Rachel's testimony came next, her voice wavering as she addressed the court. "I never intended to harm Ethan," she said, glancing at me fleetingly. "I believed I was helping the family. Julian convinced me it was necessary to safeguard the estate." The judge's tone cut through her words, firm and direct. "And your relationship with Mr. Westbrook, how did that serve the estate's interests?" Rachel faltered, her composure cracking. "It was an error in judgment. I was vulnerable, and it clouded my decisions. I never wanted things to escalate like this." My hands balled into fists beneath the table, anger surging at her attempt to deflect blame after months of deception. David rose, his voice unwavering as he pressed her. "Mrs. Caro, did you collaborate with Mr. Westbrook to manipulate the will for your benefit?" She hesitated, tears welling up. "I didn't view it that way then. I thought we were assisting." David continued, unrelenting. "And the funds moved to your personal accounts. How is that assistance?" Silence followed, her lack of response damning as she sank back into her seat, the weight of her words, or lack thereof, hanging in the air. The session concluded with the judge calling for a recess to deliberate, and I stepped outside, the crisp air a jolt against my overheated skin. David joined me, his tone cautiously hopeful. "We've got a strong chance, Ethan. The evidence is compelling, and their defense is flimsy." I nodded, my mind replaying Rachel's excuses and Julian's cold detachment. Her tears didn't move me, she regretted being exposed, not her actions. Julian's arrogance only fueled my resolve. Whatever the judge decided, I wasn't retreating. This fight was far from over. I sat in the stillness of my new apartment, the hum of the city filtering through the walls as I stared at the paperwork scattered across my dining table. The sale of my father's estate had gone through that morning, the final signatures inked with a steadiness I hadn't felt in months. I traced the numbers on the documents with my finger, the proceeds now funneled into my cybersecurity firm, a lifeline to a future I could shape on my own terms. The weight of the house, with its echoing halls and the ghosts of betrayal, had lifted, replaced by a cautious optimism I wasn't sure I deserved yet. My phone buzzed, Mark's name lighting up the screen, and I answered with a tired but genuine, "Hey, good to hear from you." Mark's voice came through warm and steady, "Just checking in. Wanted to see how you're holding up after today." I leaned back in my chair, running a hand through my hair as I replied, "It's strange, letting go of that place, but it feels right, like I'm finally cutting the last thread tying me to all that mess." Mark didn't push, just listened as I talked about the firm's latest project, a contract with a mid-sized tech company that could open doors to bigger clients down the road. "We're upgrading their entire system, building something they can rely on, and it's keeping me busy enough to stay out of my own head," I said, my tone lighter than it had been in weeks. Mark chuckled softly and responded, "That's the Ethan I know, always finding a way to turn chaos into something solid." We talked for a while longer, Mark filling me in on his own life, the mundane details grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. When the call ended, I set the phone down and looked out at the city lights, their steady glow a contrast to the storm I'd weathered. I thought about Rachel, the last time I'd seen her at the courthouse, her apology hanging between us like a frayed rope neither could grasp. I hadn't spoken to her since, and the silence felt like a boundary I wasn't ready to cross. The next morning, I walked into the office, the space buzzing with quiet energy as my team moved between desks and screens. I'd handpicked every person here, their loyalty earned through months of shared late nights and hard-won successes. Priya, my lead developer, approached with a tablet in hand, her expression focused as she said, "We've hit a snag with the encryption protocol, nothing major, but it'll take an extra day to sort out." I nodded, appreciating her directness, and replied, "Take the time you need. Better to get it right than rush it and leave gaps." She gave a quick smile and headed back to her station, leaving me to settle at my own desk, the rhythm of the work pulling me in. I spent the day digging into code, troubleshooting alongside my team. The problems we solved a welcome distraction from the ones I couldn't. By late afternoon, I stepped out for air, the crispness of the day cutting through the fog of my thoughts. I walked to a nearby park, hands in my pockets, watching people move through their lives, joggers, parents with kids, an old man feeding pigeons from a bench. Sitting on a bench of my own, I let my mind drift to the hearings I'd attended, the final gavel falling on Rachel and Julian's sentences weeks ago. Probation and restitution hadn't erased the sting of what they'd done, but seeing them held accountable had steadied me, a line drawn under the chaos. Julian's polished confidence had cracked in the courtroom, his excuses unraveling as the evidence piled up, while Rachel's attempts to explain herself had sounded hollow even to her own ears. I had sat through it all, my silence louder than any outburst could have been, a choice to let the truth speak for itself. Now, as I watched a kid chase a soccer ball across the grass, I wondered what Rachel was doing, where she'd gone after moving out. I didn't wish her harm, but I couldn't muster the energy to care beyond that. The space she'd once occupied in my life now a blank page I wasn't ready to fill. Back at the apartment that evening, I cooked a simple meal, the act of chopping vegetables and stirring a pot oddly calming. I ate at the table, the paperwork pushed aside, and thought about my father, not the will or the betrayal, but the man himself, the quiet strength he'd carried. I remembered a day from years back, fishing at a lake upstate, my father laughing as I tangled my line in the reeds. "Patience, kid, it's not about the catch. It's about the time you spend figuring it out," he'd said, clapping me on the shoulder. That memory stuck with me now, a tether to something real amid all the noise. I cleared the dishes, the routine settling me, and sat down with a book I'd been meaning to read, a dense history of cryptography that suited my mood. The words pulled me in, and for a few hours, I lost myself in the puzzle of the past, a reminder that people had always found ways to protect what mattered. Before bed, I stood at the window again, the city sprawling out below me, alive and indifferent. I thought about the firm, the team I'd built, the life I was piecing together from the wreckage. It wasn't perfect, and the trust I'd once given freely still felt like a muscle I had to retrain. But I was moving forward, step by deliberate step. I turned off the lights and climbed into bed, the quiet wrapping around me like a shield. As I drifted off, I pictured my father's face, the approval I hoped I'd earned, and for the first time in a long while, sleep came without the weight of what I'd lost pressing down on me.